I will never forget the night when everything started to change. Pedro, my husband of 10 years, had invited his friend Rafael to dinner. It was a night like any other, or at least that's how I thought at first. I prepared dinner, as I always did, without imagining that that night would mark the beginning of an emotional roller coaster that would shake the foundations of my life. When Rafael arrived, I noticed something different in the environment. Maybe it was the way he smiled when greeting me, or how his eyes held mine for a second longer than necessary at that moment. I attributed the monotony that had taken over my marriage to my imagination and made me yearn for something that would break the routine. Dinner was filled with laughter and trivial conversations. Pedro talked about work as usual, while I limited myself to nodding and smiling at the right moments. It was then that Rafael asked me about myself, about my dreams and aspirations. No one had asked me that in years, not even Pedro that night. While I was washing the dishes, I felt Rafael's presence behind me. He offered to help me, and for a moment, our hands touched each other. They brushed, an electric current ran through my body, awakening sensations that I believed forgotten before leaving. Rafael asked me for my phone number with the excuse of sending me a receipt that we had discussed during dinner. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. Rafael and I began exchanging messages, at first about banal subjects, but little by little our conversations became deeper and more personal. I found myself anxiously waiting for each message from him, feeling an emotion I hadn't experienced in a long time. Pedro immersed in his work. As always, he barely noticed my change in mood, passing long hours at the office. And when he was at home, his attention was divided between the television and his cell phone. If felt invisible, like just another piece of furniture in our house, it was during one of Pedro's business trips that everything came to a critical point. Rafael called me asking if he could come by the house to leave me book we had discussed. I knew I should say no because it was dangerous, but a part of me longed for his presence. When he arrived, the tension between us was palpable. We sat on the sofa, supposed light talk about the book, but we both knew that this was not the real reason for his visit. I don't know who made the first move, but suddenly we found ourselves kissing passionately. All the lone lines, all the frustration accumulated over years exploded in that moment. What followed was a whirlwind of passion and guilt. While Rafael hugged me, I felt that I was alive again, that someone really saw me and wanted me, but at the same time the image of Pedro appeared in my mind, reminding me of my marriage vows. After Rafael left, I sat on the bathroom floor and I cried. What I had done, how I had gotten to this point. I felt torn between the emotion of this new connection and the crushing weight of guilt. The following days were torture. Every time Pedro kissed or hugged me, I felt as if I had written infidel on my forehead. Rafael kept sending me messages declaring his feelings, saying that he had never felt something like this for anyone. I oscillated between wanting to cut off all contact with him and desperately yearning for his presence. One afternoon, while Pedro was working late, I met Rafael in a cafe away from ours neighborhood. I needed to see him, talk to him face to face, try to understand what was happening between us. I can't stop thinking about you, Rafael told me, taking my hand across the table. I know it's wrong. You're my friend's wife, but I can't help what I feel. Your words resonated inside me, reflecting exactly my own feelings. I also think about you constantly, I admitted. But this can't go on. I have a marriage, a life. Are you happy in this marriage? Rafael asked me, looking directly into my eyes. Do you feel really valued and beloved? Your question hit me like a punch in the stomach. I was happy. It had been so long since I asked myself that I had gotten used to the routine, to the comfort of both. But that was enough. The days turned into weeks and the weeks into months. My relationship with Rafael. I continued in secret, stealing moments together when we could. Each meeting was a mixture of ecstasy and remorse with him. I felt alive, desired, appreciated. But every time I returned home, the guilt consumed me. Pedro began to notice changes in me. He asked me why I was so. I was distracted because sometimes I was staring into space with a smile on my lips. I made up excuses saying I was tired or that I had a lot to think about. Each lie was like a small cut in my soul. One night after making love with Pedro, I started crying for him. He hugged me, worried, asking what was happening. I was about to confess everything, to release the weight I was carrying on my shoulders, but fear paralyzed me. How could I destroy our life together? How could I hurt him so much? Rafael, in turn, began to pressure me to that I made a decision. We can't go on like this. He told me in one of our clandestine meetings, I love you and I really want to be with you, not just in stolen moments. Your words filled me with a mixture of emotion and terror. I loved Rafael, or was I just in love with the idea of being loved, of feeling alive again? And as for Pedro, despite our problems, he continued to be the man with whom I had shared a decade of my life. The situation came to a critical point when Pedro announced that he would have to go on a business trip. 2 weeks. He saw panic in Rafael's eyes when I told him, "It's our opportunity." He told me we can spend time together without worrying, without hiding. The idea was tempting, but also terrifying. 2 weeks with Rafael would mean crossing a line from which there would be not turning back. No more. It would just be an adventure, but something much deeper and more complicated. The night before Pedro left, while we were packing our bags, he surprised me with a gift. It was a beautiful, delicate, and elegant necklaces. "Or you can remember me while I'm away," he said with a smile. The gesture broke my heart. How could I be considering betraying him in this way? The first few days after Pedro's departure were torture. Rafael called me constantly, wanting to see us, but I resisted. I spent sleepless nights debating between desire and duty, between what I wanted and what I was supposed to do. Finally, in the middle of the second week, I gave and invited Rafael to come to my house. When he arrived, the tension between us was palpable. We kissed passionately as soon as she closed the door, as if we had held our breath for days. That night, while I was in Rafael's arms in the bed, I shared with Pedro. The reality of what I was doing hit me with all its force. It was no longer just an adventure, a momentary mistake. This was a conscious choice, a decision to completely betray my husband. Rafael must have felt my restlessness, because he hugged me tighter. "I love you," he whispered in my ear. "Let's leave all this behind and start a new life together." His words should have filled me with joy, but instead I felt an emptiness in my stomach. Was that really what I wanted? I was willing to give up everything for this new emotion. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. Rafael and I spent every moment together, living a kind of eerily honeymoon. We cooked together. We watched films snuggled on the sofa. We walked through the park hand in hand. It was like living in a dream, one that I didn't want to wake up from. But reality always finds a way to infiltrate itself. Every time my phone rang with a message from Pedro, I felt like I was jolted awake. Every photo of us on the walls of the house was a constant reminder of the life I was considering leaving behind. The night before Pedro Rafael's return, and I had a serious talk tomorrow. Everything changes. He told me, "You have to make a decision. I am ready to leave everything for you, but I need to know if you feel the same." I remained silent, unable to answer how I could decide between two lives, between two men, between two versions of myself. On the one hand, there was security and the shared history with Pedro. On the other, the passion and the promise of a new beginning with Rafael. That night, after Rafael left, I sat on the sofa with a glass of wine, mentally going over the last few months, how I had gotten to this point. At what point had I allowed my life to become this mess of lies and betrayals? I remembered the day of my wedding with Pedro, how happy and hopeful I felt. I thought about all the good times we had shared and the plans we had made together, but I also remembered yours about the feeling of being invisible, of not really being valued. Then I thought about Rafael and how he made me feel alive and wanted, and how rarely listened to me when I spoke, and how he was interested in my thoughts and dreams. But was that enough to build a life together? Or was it just the thrill of the new, of the forbidden as the dawn approached? I realized that I couldn't continue living like this. The guilt, the secret, the constant feeling of betraying not only Pedro but also myself were destroying me inside. I picked up my phone and sent a message to Rafael. "We need to talk, come home as soon as you can." When he arrived, your face was full of hope and fear in equal parts. He sat in front of Meta. "King, my hands, did you make a decision?" asked me with a trembling voice. I took a deep breath, gathering all the courage I could. "Yes," said Rafael, "what we experienced in this month was intense and beautiful. You made me feel things that I believed forgotten, but I saw how the hope in your eyes slowly faded. But you can't leave Pedro, he completed it for me." I felt it with tears in my eyes. It's not just about Pedro, it's about me. Who I am. I can't build a new life on the foundations of alien and a betrayal. Rafael was silent. For a moment, processing my words, she finally spoke with a choked voice. "I love you. I really love you, but I understand your decision only if you don't regret it." We hugged for the last time, full of everything that could have been, but never would be when he left. I felt like a part of me was with him, but I also felt a strange relief, like I could finally breathe. After months of drowning the rest, I spent the day cleaning the house, erasing any trace of what had happened in the last 2 weeks. When I finished, I sat on the sofa and looked around. Everything seemed the same, but I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. When Pedro arrived that night, I welcomed him with a hug. Stronger than usual, he looked at me surprised but happy. I missed you. He said, I missed you too. I replied, and for the first time in months, it wasn't a lie that night. While Pedro slept next to me, I made a decision I couldn't continue living. In this version of our marriage, we needed to really talk about our problems, our desires or expectations, and if we couldn't work things out, then maybe it was time to consider other options. The next morning, I woke up before Pedro had prepared fast and waited for him in the kitchen with my heart pounding. When he came in yawning and rubbing his eyes, she looked at me curiously. Pedro, I said, take a deep breath. We need to talk. His face became serious immediately. He sat in front of me waiting for a moment. I considered telling Rafael everything about my infidelity, but I realized that it would only cause more pain. What we needed was honesty about our feelings, not a confession that would only hurt us more. I'm not happy it started, and I don't think you are either. We have been living like two strangers under the same roof. And I can't goon like this, is all the pain in his eyes, but I also saw something more, recognition. He had felt it too. You are right. They said, finally, I have been so busy with work, so worried about providing and being successful, that I forgot the most important thing. We spent the next few hours really talking for the first time on Sanyi. Roycewood we laughed, we got hangry and were reconciled. We talked about our forgotten dreams, our frustrations and fears. It was painful and liberating at the same time. Pedro admitted that he felt pressured by being the provider of the family, that he feared not being enough. I told him about my feeling of invisibility, of having lost my identity in our marriage. Do you think we can fix this? Pedro asked me with a mixture of hope and fear in his voice. I don't know, I answered honestly, but I think it's worth trying. We decided to seek couples therapy. We wanted to give ourselves our chance of rebuilding our relationship, of rediscovering each other and ourselves in the process. The first sessions were difficult. Resentments came to the surface, buried in unmet expectations, abandoned dreams. There were times when it thought it would be easier to just give up, separate, and follow each one your own. I walked the image of Rafael, the promise of a new beginning, kept appearing in my mind in the most difficult moments. But with each session and each honest conversation, I felt that we were building something new. It was not the passionate and blind love that I had experienced with Rafael, but something deeper. More mature, was a love based on real knowledge of the other, acceptance of our imperfections, and the mutual desire to grow together. Pedro began to make changes in his professional life by reducing his working hours to spend more time at home. I, in turn, resumed old passions that I had abandoned, such as painting and writing. We started having weekly meetings, traveling together, rediscovering why we had fallen in love in the first place. It was not easy. There were days when the temptation to call Rafael was almost unbearable. There were nights when I asked myself if I was doing Isa right, if I wasn't giving up an opportunity for true happiness for fear of change. But over time, these thoughts became less frequent. I began to see Pedro with new eyes, to appreciate his efforts, to fall in love again with his laughter. His way from frowning when he was focused, the way he hugged me at night one day. Almost a year after that conversation in the kitchen, Pedro surprised me with a special dinner. He had cooked my favorite dish and put candles on the table. After dinner, he took out a small box from the pocket. I know we are already married, he said, opening the box to reveal a beautiful ring, but I want to ask you to marry me again, that we renew our vows, but this time with a deeper understanding of what it really means to love and commit. The tears ran down my face as I nodded at that moment. I thought about Rafael and the life I could have had with him, but I realized that I no longer longed for that life that we had. Pedro and I was now more real, stronger than any fantasy of a new beginning that night. While I was in Pedro's arms, I reflected on the path that brought us here. Infidelity, pain, the almost breakdown of our marriage, everything had been part of a difficult but necessary process of growth. I realized that true love is not always easy or comfortable. Sometimes it requires hard work, brutal honesty, and the willingness to look at our own and our partner's flaws, but when it is cultivated with patience and dedication, it can blossom into something beautiful and lasting. I never told Pedro about Rafael. I decided this burden was meant to carry my constant reminder how close I came to losing something precious for the illusion of something new and exciting. As a fella's leap that night at a peace I hadn't experienced in a long time, I knew our path wouldn't always be easy, that there would be more challenges ahead. But I also knew that now we had the tools to face them together. The next morning, I woke up before Pedro. I watched his relaxed and peaceful face leaping. I thought of all the mornings we had shared and all the mornings that still awaited us. I felt a wave of gratitude for the second chance, for the strength we had found to fight. For our love, I silently got out of bed and went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast, while the coffee was ready. I looked out the window at the garden we had planted together last summer. The flowers were beginning to sprout, a reminder that even after the longest winter, it's hard. Life always finds a way to be reborn. I heard Pedro's steps coming down the stairs. I turned to welcome him with a smile, a genuine smile that was born from the depths of my heart. When our eyes met, I knew with certainty that I had taken the right decision. "Good morning, love," said Pedro, hugging me from behind while I served the coffee. "Good morning," I replied, leaning into his embrace, ready for another day of our new life together. Pedro kissed me softly on the cheek with you. "I'm ready for anything." And so, with the aroma of brewed coffee and the promise of a new day ahead, we sat down to have breakfast together. Not as two people stuck in the routine of a worn-out marriage, but as two life companions, ready to face together any challenge that the future may face. Could bring. I looked at the ring on my finger, the symbol of our renewed commitment, and smiled. Life doesn't always go the way we hope, and love isn't always easy. But when you find someone willing to fight with you, to grow with you, to forgive and be forgiven, then there is something truly special. My adventure with Rafael had been intense and passionate but ephemeral. What I had with Pedro was lasting, deep and real. I had learned that true love is not just about butterflies in the stomach and moments of unbridled passion. It is about choose someone every day to work together to build a shared life of supporting each other through good times and bad. As Pedro and I planned our vow renewal ceremony, I found myself thinking about all the couples who give up too soon, who don't give in, chance to rediscover yourself and reconnect. I wanted to shout to them, not to give up, that true love is worth fighting for.